What does Slavoj Zizek have to teach us about AI ethics? A lot, I think, and here's why. AI ethicists often discuss things as though it were possible to actually stem the tide of history and forever forbid people from doing certain things, forbid the AIs from doing certain things. And that's the kind of rules and approach to writing laws that is commonplace and is a little naive. It's a little too easy. And this is where the sophistication of someone like Zizek with respect to laws makes a lot of sense and has something important to teach us. Because unfortunately, as we've heard recently from OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, with respect to can we actually detect plagiarism for ChatGPT, no. Not really, even though they have efforts to try and make it possible to detect AI writing. Realistically, those kind of detectors, if you can build a detector, then you can build something to try and work against it to make sure that the detector can't detect the counterfeit. I mean, that's the whole principle behind a GAN. And so it's a lost cause. And he didn't use those words exactly, but maybe he should have. That's ultimately the case. With a lot of aspects of AI ethics, that's a lost cause. We're not going to be able to prevent people from doing certain things with this. We're better off knowing and planning for the fact that we're not going to be able to prevent people from certain abuses of AI. So, Zizek on law. Zizek tells us that laws are written, and they are best written when we know that they're going to be broken a certain amount of the time. I mean, think of speed limits, right? We know that people aren't going to follow those all the time. And in fact, it would be a terrible thing if we tried to enforce it all the time and rigidly make it to where you could never go over the speed limit. That would be awful, and everyone sort of knows that that would be awful. Laws in general, Zizek tells us, not only are written like that, but they should be written like that. Laws, according to Zizek, tell us about what it is that a society considers normal and what they consider deviant. And so it's a symbol for where that line is, and it gives us a common reference point and something that we can point to that's tangible and say, okay, here is what it means to be normal. Here is what it means to be deviant. And so with AI, this is an important lesson as well, because if we continuously beat our heads against the wall and say, no, we're going to force everyone to follow the speed limit, it's just not going to happen. And so we're better off conceiving of the rules, conceiving of the way in which AI should be enforced, its behavior should be enforced, in a manner that is consonant with what Zizek pointed out with respect to laws. We know they're going to be broken some of the time, and that flexibility allows us to write better laws. Now, ultimately, this is a Stoic point. This harkens to a Stoic maxim. If we go into a bath and we expect people to behave well and to behave virtuously, then we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. We know people are not going to behave like that. If I get up in the morning and I get on the interstate and say, okay, I'm sure people are going to behave perfectly today, and I set my expectations according to that, which is completely ridiculous. But at the same time, we all sort of implicitly do this. We all sort of assume that everybody else knows the rules and they should be good people. And if they're not being good people and good drivers, then they are ultimately culpable for that. And we react, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they're doing this, and then rude and terrible things follow. But wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be healthier for us to approach a situation with traffic, to approach a situation where we know people are not going to behave themselves by setting our expectations accordingly? We know they're not going to behave themselves. The same thing for AI. We know people aren't going to behave themselves. We know the kind of abuses, and we know what they're going to do. If we introspect even for a moment, we know what people are going to do with these things. And so when we write rules, when we write laws, and when we have prescriptions for what it is that the AI should and shouldn't be able to do, there needs to be a certain amount of flexibility built into those rules so that we can make better laws on the model of what it is that Zizek has pointed out, because that gives us a much more flexible, a much more adaptable, and a much more longer lasting set of rules. When you prescribe too much, oftentimes that's a recipe for failure. It leads to a lack of trust in the system, and the whole thing just doesn't necessarily work very well. Witness the constitutions that have been written after the American Constitution, but on the model of that, saying, okay, we're going to start with that, but we're going to make a lot of things more specific. Oftentimes it doesn't work very well. One of the beauties of the way that it was written, and I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but one of the beauties in the way that it was written is that it is generic, that it is flexible, and that it is broad in scope, interpretable, and maybe even in some cases usefully ambiguous. That's something to consider, that laws may actually be usefully ambiguous. So, I think this is one of the lessons that we can afford to take from philosophy, especially at a time when we really need it, because we've got to figure out something with this. We're going to have to do something, because the capability is coming. If we insist upon setting extremely rigid rules for it, we're going to be disappointed.